The restaurant fell silent for just a moment when the elegant black car stopped outside. Every eye turned toward the woman who stepped out wearing a tailored suit that reflected years of success, confidence, and discipline. She was the kind of CEO whose name appeared in business magazines, whose decisions shaped companies, and whose presence alone intimidated boardrooms. But that evening, despite all her achievements, she was walking into something she secretly hated, a blind date arranged by her closest friend. She expected another awkward dinner she could politely escape from. What she never imagined was that before the night was over, her life would hang by a thread, and the man she dismissed in the first 5 minutes would become the only reason she survived. Before we begin, if you believe that kindness matters more than appearances, and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner for more inspiring stories that remind us what truly matters. Victoria Lawson had built her life on one simple rule: never depend on anyone. She grew up watching her parents lose everything after trusting the wrong business partners. Since then, she believed emotions clouded judgment and relationships only slowed people down. By the age of 42, she had become one of the youngest CEOs in her industry. Her company was worth hundreds of millions. Her calendar was packed months in advance, and every achievement came through relentless discipline. Yet when she returned each evening to her luxurious penthouse overlooking the city, silence greeted her louder than applause ever could. Her friend Melissa insisted she needed balance instead of another business merger. After months of refusing, Victoria finally agreed to one blind date, mostly to prove that Melissa was wasting her time. She entered the restaurant expecting another wealthy executive or ambitious entrepreneur. Instead, she found Daniel Brooks waiting quietly at the corner table. His jacket was neat but old, his hands carried the roughness of years of physical work, and beside his chair rested a small backpack decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. Melissa had forgotten to mention one important detail. Daniel was a widowed single father raising his 7-year-old son alone. Victoria's disappointment barely stayed hidden. She wondered how someone like him could possibly understand her world. She assumed he lacked ambition because he wasn't wearing expensive clothes or talking about investments. She politely smiled but spent most of dinner checking her phone and thinking about unfinished emails. Daniel never complained. He simply listened, answered respectfully, and occasionally smiled whenever he mentioned his son Ethan. There was a calmness about him that contrasted sharply with Victoria's constant urgency, but she mistook his quiet confidence for ordinary simplicity. What Victoria never asked was what Daniel actually did. She assumed he repaired machinery because his hands showed years of hard labor. The truth was far more remarkable. Before tragedy changed his life, Daniel had served for 12 years as a military search and rescue specialist, trained to survive impossible conditions, perform emergency medicine, and make life-saving decisions under unbearable pressure. After his wife passed away from cancer, he left that career to raise Ethan, taking maintenance jobs that allowed him to spend evenings with his son. He never talked about his past because he believed actions spoke louder than impressive stories. After dinner, Victoria thanked him politely and decided they had nothing in common. She offered a brief handshake and prepared to leave. Rain had begun pouring heavily outside, and traffic across the city slowed to a crawl. Daniel noticed the weather reports on a television inside the restaurant warning about flash flooding and dangerous road conditions. He gently suggested waiting until the storm passed, but Victoria smiled confidently. She believed deadlines mattered more than storms. Her luxury car disappeared into sheets of rain while Daniel quietly loaded Ethan's backpack into his old pickup truck. Something in his instincts made him uneasy. Years of emergency training had taught him to respect nature's warnings. Instead of driving home immediately, he chose a different route that happened to follow the same highway Victoria had taken. Only 20 minutes later, disaster struck. A section of the mountain highway collapsed after relentless rainfall loosened the earth beneath it. Cars slammed into one another as concrete barriers crumbled. Victoria's vehicle spun violently before crashing against twisted guardrails. The impact trapped her inside as water rushed across the damaged roadway. Her phone had shattered. The airbags deployed, but smoke filled the cabin while rainwater slowly crept higher around the doors. Drivers nearby panicked. afraid the unstable road might collapse further. Emergency responders were delayed because landslides blocked multiple access routes. Every passing minute reduced Victoria's chances of survival. Daniel reached the traffic jam just as frightened motorists gathered helplessly at a distance. One glance at the wreckage awakened instincts he hadn't used in years. Without hesitation, he parked his truck, grabbed emergency supplies he always carried, and sprinted toward the unstable roadway despite people shouting for him to stay back. His movements were calm, precise, and fearless. He evaluated the damaged pavement, calculated the safest path, and reached Victoria's crushed vehicle. The driver's door refused to open. Using rescue techniques learned through countless dangerous missions, he broke a side window without causing further injury, stabilized her neck, and carefully freed her from the twisted metal moments before another section of the road gave way beneath the vehicle. The car disappeared into the raging flood seconds after Daniel pulled her to safety. Victoria drifted in and out of consciousness while Daniel treated her injuries using supplies from his rescue kit. He monitored her breathing, controlled the bleeding from a deep cut across her forehead, and kept her awake until helicopters finally reached the scene nearly 40 minutes later. Doctors later admitted that without those immediate interventions, severe blood loss and shock would almost certainly have claimed her life. News of the rescue spread quickly. Television stations praised the anonymous man who risked everything for a stranger. Reporters searched for him, but Daniel returned home before interviews began because Ethan was waiting for breakfast the next morning. To him, saving a life required no reward. Weeks later, Victoria recovered enough to leave the hospital. During rehabilitation, doctors explained every decision Daniel had made during those critical moments. They described professional rescue techniques that ordinary civilians simply did not possess. Curious and humbled, Victoria finally learned the truth about the man she had dismissed so casually over dinner. For the first time in years, shame replaced pride. She realized she had judged an entire human being by the cost of his clothes and the simplicity of his lifestyle. She had mistaken humility for weakness and quietness for lack of achievement. Meanwhile, Daniel possessed courage, discipline, and compassion that no executive title could ever guarantee. Determined to thank him properly, Victoria visited the modest neighborhood where Daniel lived with Ethan. She expected him to accept a generous financial reward. Instead, she found him helping children repair broken bicycles at a community center on his day off. Ethan proudly introduced every child by name, explaining that his father taught them never to give up when something seemed impossible to fix. Daniel politely refused Victoria's check. He explained that saving someone's life should never become a business transaction. Instead, he asked if her company would consider funding emergency preparedness programs for schools and community centers. He believed ordinary people could save countless lives if they received proper first aid training. That request transformed Victoria more deeply than the accident itself. Within months, her company launched a nationwide initiative providing free emergency response education, rescue equipment, and scholarships for families of first responders. Thousands of people benefited from a decision inspired by one humble father who never sought recognition. Victoria also began changing the culture inside her company. Hiring managers were instructed to value character alongside experience. Volunteer work became part of leadership development. Employees were encouraged to support local communities instead of competing only for promotions. Profits remained strong, but something far more meaningful emerged: respect, empathy, and genuine human connection. As seasons passed, Victoria and Daniel built a friendship rooted not in status but in mutual admiration. Ethan's laughter slowly filled the quiet spaces that had once echoed through Victoria's lonely life. She discovered that success felt empty when measured only by wealth, but became extraordinary when shared through compassion. Sometimes the greatest heroes arrive wearing ordinary clothes. Sometimes the richest hearts belong to people with the simplest lives. And sometimes the person the world overlooks carries exactly the strength needed to change another person's destiny forever. If this story touched your heart, please write "Kindness changes everything" in the comments below. We'd love to know you're watching with us. As this story comes to an end, remember that appearances can hide incredible courage, and every person deserves to be seen before they are judged. If this message inspired you or reminded you to look beyond first impressions, please like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind the world that kindness, humility, and compassion will always be stronger than pride. Sometimes one act of kindness doesn't just save a life, it transforms many more that follow.